Check, check, check. Good morning, everyone. We're just getting settled and we should start in a minute or two. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call our meeting to order. This is the 11th meeting of the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee. I do want to acknowledge that we are located on the unceded ancestral territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe First Nations people. We acknowledge and respect our First Nations brothers and sisters who have been stewards and inhabitants of this land for millennia. I look to our committee coordinator to start off with a roll call, please.
Councillor Bradley.
Here.
Councillor DeRoche.
Here.
Councillor Devine.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Johnson. I see Councillor Johnson on the screen. Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Luloff.
Present.
Conseillère Plante.
Ici.
Vice Chair Hill.
Present.
And Chair Brockington.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And it's good to see everyone both in person and virtually online this morning. Welcome to everyone. So today is a special day for us. Today marks General Manager Kim Ayot's last meeting of this committee before he retires. And I certainly acknowledge there'll be an opportunity at a future council meeting for a more formal send-off, but certainly as this is your final committee meeting with us, General Manager, a few comments on my behalf. You have certainly made a significant contribution to the safety, security, and quality of life of all residents and visitors through your career, and in particular with this committee. And just a short synopsis of your stellar career. You began with the Ministry of the Environment as an investigator. In '89, you joined the St. Catharines Fire Department as a volunteer firefighter and rose to the ranks of training officer and station captain. Then in 1994, you worked with the Ontario Fire Marshal's Office as a fire investigator and became a manager of this portfolio. In 2003, we welcomed you with a position with the Ottawa Fire Service as Chief of Special Operations and promoted to Deputy Fire Chief. In 2018, you became the Fire Chief of the Ottawa Fire Services, and 3 years later became our General Manager of Emergency and Protective Services. We want you to understand and appreciate how much we have supported you and appreciate your fantastic work, not just with the City of Ottawa, but throughout your whole career, and appreciate everything that you've done, your collaborative approach, sound advice, and certainly gentleman spirit throughout. So on behalf of all of my committee members, we thank you for your service and we hope you enjoy your retirement. Thank you, sir. Okay, there is other business this morning. Staff have presentations for us today. Chief Hutt will provide a presentation on the Fire Start program, a timely update as the summer months approach. Chief will also provide a short presentation on the report on the Ottawa Fire Services establishing bylaw, which would repeal and replace the old bylaw and which regulates the fire services for the city of Ottawa. Following that, the Director of Bylaw and Regulatory Services, Chapman, will provide a presentation on the Bylaw and Regulatory Services 2023 annual report, which he will share with us an update on the services programs and enforcement metrics for that year. Okay, looking at our agenda now, are there any declarations of interest from any member? Seeing none. Item 3 is the confirmation of minutes from meeting 10 held on the 21st of March, 2024. Are those minutes received? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, item 4 is response to inquiry. We did have one inquiry with respect to City of Ottawa spay and neuter clinic. Any issues on this item? Councillor Devine?
Thank you, Chair. I have a motion to lift this item onto the agenda just for a brief discussion.
Fair enough. So I believe that a motion has been prepared. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. That pursuant to subsection 89(3) of the procedure bylaw, being bylaw number 2022-410, the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee approved that the rules of procedure be suspended to allow for the following item to be lifted onto consideration of the item listed as 4.1, response to inquiry, EPPS C 2023-06, City of Ottawa Spay Neuter Clinic.
Okay, so Councillor Devine just has some follow-up questions. Is it the will of the committee to allow this to rise onto our agenda at this time?
Yes.
Yes, so no.
Yes.
No objection. Thank you. Okay, so we'll lift that now, and I'd like to just deal with that now. So Councillor Devine, your questions.
Great, thank you, Chair. And there really aren't questions, just some comments after having worked with staff on this. So last week, my office received communication from an Ottawa animal rescue organization that spoke to their concern about a pattern of escalation when it comes to unwanted domestic cats being handed over to a system that's already having a capacity issue. And this past weekend, Ottawa Humane Society itself reported that it took in an unusually high 82 rescue cats. So while these may be recent developments or simply anomalies, while these may not be high priority issues, it does seem that we may have a growing problem on our hands. I'd like to thank staff for their efforts in responding to my inquiry. There was a line in the response that I did want to focus on. That line reads, since 2020, the demand for spaying and neutering has increased as a result of more residents adopting cats and dogs during the pandemic. Staff will continue to evaluate demand growth and make recommendations that meet legislative requirements to committee and council as needed. I think we are getting to that point where growth will likely be leading to recommendations. And so while this may be a temporary problem, it also has the potential to become exponentially larger, cats being what they are. So my office is collaborating with staff to address issues concerning the city-run spay-neuter clinic. Despite licensing and legislative hurdles, there is a shared commitment among staff, organizations, and residents to mitigate this crisis. I also very much appreciate that staff, and I've had conversations with Christine Hardig about this, that staff is willing to work with my office to do some research on other facilities and services outside Ottawa to see if we can explore other avenues for our city. And on a related note, Ottawa Humane Society is currently waiving adoption fees for cats 7 and older. So don't forget to spay and neuter your pets. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to staff.
Thank you, Councillor Devine, for that. It's interesting because when I was preparing for the meeting last night, reading the spay and neuter response, I thought of Bob Barker as well. So it's interesting. Chief Chapman, do you have anything to add to what Councillor Devine has said?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor, for those comments. Nothing to add. As the Councillor has stated, we've been engaged with the Councillor's office on discussions on this, and we'll continue to monitor. And if needed, we'll bring some recommendations forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. And I don't think we have to do anything formally with this now, Chris. No. we just move on. Okay, thank you. Okay, item 5 on our agenda, there is a presentation about the Fire Smart program, so we'll come back to that in 1 second. Item 6, bylaw and regulatory services 2023 annual report. We have a presentation. We also have public delegations. That matter will be held. 6.2 is the new Ottawa Fire Services establishing bylaw. Also, I believe there's a presentation on that, Chief. Is that correct? Okay, fair enough. So we'll hold that. Item 7, status update, the committee's inquiries and motions for the period ending the 7th of May. Can we receive this item? Receive? Okay, so we received item 7 and we'll deal with the remaining items after substantive issues. Okay, the Fire Start program. I know Chief Hutt will provide a presentation. General Manager, do you have any introductory comments?
I believe there's a procedure that we need to follow to actually have this presentation. So
That's correct.
do you want to do that first or would you like me to?
Thank you. I'll turn to the Vice Chair just to add this matter to our agenda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. That pursuant to subsection 89.3 of the procedure bylaw, being bylaw 2022-410, the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee, EPPSC, waived the rules of procedure to receive a presentation from the Chief, Ottawa Fire Services regarding the Fire Smart program on today's EPPSC agenda, and that pursuant to subsection 83.4A of the procedure bylaw, the committee dispensed with the requirement for staff to provide a separate written report on the presentation.
So colleagues, this motion simply allows us to allow the presentation on the agenda today. Is that matter carried?
Carried.
All right, thank you. All right, General Manager.
Thank you, Chair. The Fire Smart program is a program it's timely that we're receiving this presentation with the summer months coming. We've also had some storms in the past year where there's a lot of debris in various locations in the city. So I'm sure there'll be questions for the Chief with regards to what activities are taking place on that front. I'm just going to pass it over to the Chief as he has a good presentation and a really good handle on where we're going. And I'm very proud of Ottawa Fire Services and their introduction of this program into our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, GM. Thank you, Chair. I am very happy to be here today to present the Fire Smart program. It's a national program recognized by all provinces and territories, and as well. And we're going to also be talking about how the Ottawa Fire Service is implementing this within our service. We're already noticing on the news in Western Canada some of the wildfires that have already started in that area. So it is a very timely presentation. And I might not be very popular when I say this, but for our area, I've welcomed the rainy spring so far because that really has helped our situation in the Ottawa region. So next slide, please. I'll be speaking about the Fire Smart program, what it is, the benefits to the communities, and to create awareness and improve preparedness in areas to the city that could affect by wildfires. I'll provide information about the wildfire urban interface, the 7 principles of Fire Smart, how it protects our properties, and finally, I'll touch basis on the communication strategy that Ottawa Fire Services and the outreach that we plan to do in 2024. Next slide, please. Fire Smart is a Canadian standard recognized by all provinces and territories. It's based on the National Fire Protection Association standards and has evolved over 40 years. Fire Smart methods have been demonstrated time and time again to reduce fire risk, loss, and under the most extreme conditions. Next slide, please. So when we talk about wildland urban interfaces, there's 2 examples that are displayed in front of you today. And really that's the area that we define that is forest and brush area, grasslands that abut residential areas. And we're very unique in the city of Ottawa. We know that the city's geographic makeup is roughly 80% rural and agricultural. But equally as important is we have a lot of NCC properties that we're faced with as well. So the interface, and there's 2 examples, Maryville Gardens is one area that we're looking at right now. And you can see where you have NCC property in the highlighted red that abuts the populated area. And then in the CARP area, you have the wooded area adjacent to a subdivision. So when we talk about the urban wildland interface, that's the area that we're talking about. Next slide, please. So FireSmart comprises of 7 disciplines. Number 1 is the education, fire prevention side of things, vegetation management, legislation, planning, development considerations, interagency cooperation, cross-training, as well as emergency planning. Next slide, please. The educational portion or elements are geared to residents living in those areas of those wildland interfaces. FireSmart education is supported by Ottawa Fire Service through our Fire Prevention Bureau, as well as our Rural Division. FireSmart presentations are delivered in conjunction with the Ministry of Natural Resources, and we'll talk more about the partnerships with all the agencies. Next slide, please. So vegetation management is probably one of the most significant aspects of the 7 principles from a prevention perspective. Vegetation management is a key component of home ignition zones to protect properties, and through best practices of removing that fuel source in and around those urban wildland interfaces is really a strategy that is to help mitigate any risk of wildland fires. We'll also be talking about, the less flammable growth, like if we have deciduous trees versus coniferous trees. So that's all to do with vegetation management. Next slide, please. So when we talk about home ignition sources, and when we do presentations, these are some areas that we talk to residents about. So there's aspects that levels of government can do, but this is from a prevention perspective. What can some of the homeowners do that live within those urban wildland interfaces? When we talk about home ignition sources, we have an immediate zone, which is anywhere 1.5 meters away from your house. We really call that the non-combustible area. Then we talk about an intermediate zone, which is 1 to 10 meters. This is materials in this area will only support fires of low intensification. And then the extended, which is 10 to 30 meters around, that interface. And that's really about what we talked about, vegetation management. It's managing that fuel load within those areas. Next slide, please. So here's another example of what I just discussed. It talks about the immediate zone that's in and around somebody's resident or dwelling. And then we talk about the intermediate. And you can see in the picture below where, proper management, you're going to have low intensification fires if it's a grass fire versus, a fuel driven from trees and brush and wood. So that's, so the picture below really depicts properly navigating the vegetation management in and around your residence. Next slide, please. The other element that we talk about is in the non-combustible area or zone, and that's right in and around your dwelling area. And it's not for us to communicate to people that they have to run out and do this tomorrow, but certainly for some of these subdivisions and homes that have been around for a long time, there's opportunities that if they're thinking about doing renovations and they live within these wildland interfaces, that there's opportunities. So when we talk about, for a house, for example, we talk about doors. You might want to consider a fire rated door for your house if you're looking at replacing your doors. Also for windows, if you're looking at replacing your windows and you're in one of these areas of this interface, maybe consider thermal windows. Roofing is really important, roofing material, and also keeping your gutters cleared. So if there's debris and vegetation on your roof area, that is very susceptible to fire. So making sure that they're kept clean. And if you're considering roofing in these areas, you might want to go to a non-combustible type roofing. We talk the outside cladding of a home. We talk about siding, versus maybe brick or stucco. Those are elements that if you're thinking of doing some home renovations, to take that under consideration as well. If you live in one of these interface areas, if you have wood burning appliances, some kind of a spark arrestor on your chimneys and that's obviously to help prevent fire or fire spread in your area. And again, just the eaves trough and the eave venting. This is material you want to, if you're doing any kind of home modifications of a non-combustible material. And these are all elements that when we get into our educational phases that we can have these discussions with homeowners. Next slide, please. So here's just a picture of vegetation management. There's the before picture where you can see it's tangled of brush and trees and woods, and you can see how effective if you do some basic vegetation management in and around your house, where it will really help from a fire prevention perspective in the event that there is a fire. Next slide, please. So legislation and development. So anytime there's changes to the urban boundary, there is discussions with the city planners in our service. And I don't want to say that's recent because we've had a number of conversations with our planning and development department on this whole wildland urban phase. And I think when you look at from a development and a perspective, that really helps focus on some of these basic principles that we've been talking about. We also talk about, the development of standards plays significant role in reducing the potential impact. So if we can be out in front of this, and before a subdivision is planned, if we can apply some of these 7 principles, it really helps from a fire prevention perspective. Next slide, please. So interagency cooperation, this is a national program. So it is recognized, as we said. So we work very closely with our provincial counterparts. In the city of Ottawa, I've mentioned this as well. The NCC are partners in these discussions. They have a huge stakeholder with reference to the amount of lands that they have in these urban interfaces. And you know what, the fire service wants to take a proactive, we have been taking a proactive measure with the provincial government, with the Ministry of Natural Resources, as well as with the NCC. Next slide, please. So cross-training, because it is a national program, there's a lot of opportunity for cross-training within the organizations. I think more importantly as well is it's who has authority to do what, to who's involved in certain aspects in the event that there is a fire. So it's having those relationships and those inner discussions ahead of time before something actually occurs. Again, when we often do these presentations, it's in conjunction with the Ministry of Natural Resources with the province. Next slide, please. I stated earlier that the city of Ottawa is very unique in our makeup. We've identified with 80% rural, agricultural, all the NCC properties that we have. Wildland fires have been at a high risk. It's for the city of Ottawa for some time. So we've prepared over a number of years. We have right now within the city, we obviously have all the professional firefighters that we have within our service, but to help augment from a wildland perspective, there's 5 specialized units. They come with trailers, UTVs to really, if they're confronted with any kind of aspect, they're able to mitigate situations. Next slide, please. Emergency planning. We often talk about this, and I know in emergency management, we talk about being ready for 72 hours. And, we're seeing some of this in Western Canada now where places are being evacuated, short-term, long-term, but it's just that preparedness. And, we work closely with Office of Emergency Management, Director Gooding, just on being prepared for the 72 hours. So as part of that fire prevention, those discussions and that dialogue is that in the event that you live in one of these areas and you're asked to leave, are you ready? Do you have a go bag? Are you good for 72 hours? So those are conversations that we'll engage as part of the emergency planning. Next slide, please. So as always, and again, just on the coattails of emergency planning, it's the Fire Smart and it's the evacuation planning tips. So these are, even though there's some generic aspects to follow for emergency planning and preparing yourself, every family is different. You have to consider that you're the vulnerable community. You have to also consider, do you have pets in your home? So developing your own checklist that in the event that you have to evacuate, you have that quick and readily available at your fingertips. So fire prevention and preparation and being proactive is critical and key. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the campaigns that the City of Ottawa Fire Services is going through. right now on the City of Ottawa Fire Services website. We have a lot of these tips already for residents so that they can go and have a look as to how they can be prepared for the upcoming season. We also have started to have information sessions with community groups and often reaching out from councillors if they have residents that are interested in a presentation to reach out to our service, and we'll coordinate these types of information sessions. Next slide. And just in summary, so we talked about the Fire Smart Canada wildland preparedness and awareness. We talked about the wildland urban interface and what that is about. We talked about the 7 principles. We talked about how people can be proactive and protect their properties. And then we also discussed how, through fire services, when we identify community risks, it's really important to us from a fire prevention perspective to get out in front of that and share this information with our residents. So that concludes my presentation, but I'm certainly available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Chief Hutt. Very well-received presentation and timely. This is good information to have any year, but when you look at, as you've mentioned, the 2018 tornadoes that started in West Carleton and moved their way eastward through the city. The derecho from a few years ago, 2 years ago, we're approaching the anniversary. Even the ice storms that we've had in recent years, there's a significant amount of brush and down trees that we all must be mindful of to mitigate risks to human and property. So thank you very much. We do have questions from committee members. I'll start with the Vice Chair Hill and then Councillors Devine and Plante. So Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I've got a few questions about the penny forest, but I'm going to let Councillor Devine hit those ones. I'm going to talk about building code right now because one of your slides there talked a lot about things like non-combustible roofing, fire-rated thermal windows, chimney modifications, eave trough and venting and such. And I know that we're on the cusp of receiving a new harmonized federal provincial green building code. My question is, are you satisfied that the language that needs to be there in order to protect our residents from fire-related issues has been adequately taken into consideration and updated in what we're going to be seeing in that building code?
Chair, thank you, Councillor, for that question. I really think that question is probably more appropriate for our folks in building services. But having said that, I do believe with the opportunity for us, the Fire Smart principles are now entrenched as part of the planning development discussions. And if there is any modifications to, like we said, the urban boundary, the discussions of developments, those are all now taken into consideration. So I think on top of what's in the building code already, from a fire safety perspective, I think these added protections of being proactive and how you can navigate some of these as homeowners, I'm comfortable with what I see today.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. I just happened to bring my OFS hat today. I don't mind wearing it during this. That wasn't planned at all. So thank you, Chief, for this. Before I get to you, Chief, Kim, I just want to tip my hat, as it were, to you. So not only thank you for your service, but I remember a quote I read a long time ago about one of the signs of leadership is the team that you leave behind you. And with you've done a good job in that regard, with Chief Hutt and with Beth Gooding and all of your team at EPPS. I frequently walk away from these meetings feeling confident. So thank you very much for that. A quick little question about the issue of 72 hours. So I was recently at a Hydro Ottawa meeting where we were discussing emergency preparedness planning. And I kept on hearing the Hydro Ottawa people refer to, so 72 hours equals 3 days, but I kept on hearing Hydro Ottawa refer to be prepared for 5 days, be prepared for 5 days. And dang, Beth, you're nodding your head. And I had to go up to Hydro Ottawa and say, am I missing something? And what they spoke to, Hydro Ottawa said that new federal language is referring to that residents and or institutions should make plans for 5 days. And so I suppose my question is there new direction from our federal overlords on that subject? And does it speak to, if there is new language, new direction on that, does it speak to a worsening climate? Or does it speak to perhaps us not having adequate plans in place to respond to a quickly escalating crisis. So can you speak generally to that?
Thank you, Chair. Director Gooding is here, and I'll ask her to address these questions. However, I'd like to just start by suggesting that the 72 hours is the time needed. We're not always able to effectively respond to all incidences as a citywide approach to everybody. So if you have 72 hours, that will buy you time for help to arrive. And that's generally the principle behind it.
Yeah.
The longer durations is really about risk specifics, and I'll get Director Gooding to speak to it. But, you know, from a hydro perspective, when you have a wide outage, we're looking at the risks that they may not be able to get your power back up for 72 hours. So you have to kind of look at what you're dealing with. But certainly there is somewhat of a change based on climate change. But Director Gooding, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So I'm not aware of a formal directive to change the 72 hours, but for several years now, there have been discussions at all levels of government of using the 72 hours as a basic minimum, and encouraging people, if they can, to prepare for longer. From a City of Ottawa perspective, it's not a recommendation that we're making related to city response times, but just in recognition that the impacts of climate change are such that we're getting more severe weather events that are impacting broader parts of our city's geography, which obviously impacts the city's ability to reach everyone quickly. But like I said, it's more of a erring on the side of caution, encouraging people to over prepare whenever possible.
Yeah, and I know that within the new organizational restructuring, where one of the 4 strategic initiative departments is climate and resilience, I certainly look forward to working with Will McDonald and that team as we come to budget 2025 to see how the city takes that into account. Now, specifically to the Fire Start program, and a little tip of the hat to my team member, Alex Harris. One of the graphics he created was used in your presentation there. So thank you for working with my office on that. As I understand it, we're going to be having a Fire Start presentation in one of my neighborhoods in the next 2 weeks or so, addressing the issues of Penny Forest. I very much appreciate the specialized training that OFS has taken up, the acquisition of new apparatuses to meet wildfire fire needs. I suppose my question, you were referencing the NCC. So Penny Forest specifically, we have a brush issue that's been on the books for a while. I very much appreciate the intervention that OFS has had in sending letters to NCC so that they may go in, because it is their jurisdiction, and clean that area up. Can you speak either specifically to that instance, that area, or more broadly to OFS's relationship with NCC in advocating for them to take up their responsibility and clearing up these areas?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, excellent. And we talked about one of the guiding principles, or 7 principles of Fire Smart, is that collaboration with all the agencies. And just not recently, but over the last couple of months, we've had a lot of good collaboration with the NCC, and to a point where we're on our 3rd meeting with the Director of Forestry Management with the NCC, talking about their roles and their responsibilities. And we have to appreciate there is an authority having jurisdiction where NCC owns the property. But we've already collaborated on how can we communicate together? How can we start sharing these Fire Smart principles with all the residents, not only in the City of Ottawa, but Gatineau as well, because it extends there as well. So we've had great collaboration that way, to a point where the NCC, when you talk about fire risk management and what their priorities are, they've identified 3 or 4 key areas that they're going through a procurement process now to get some of these areas cleaned up. And that's a room we talk about vegetation removing some of it. And when speaking with the Director of Forestry Management, there was they were hitting some of the key principles about, they look at what the vegetation type is, what the risk is, and what is that in with regards to vicinity. And I think we can also appreciate that this all can't be done overnight. Like, we've been hit year after year with a significant amount of, significant weather events. But it's reassuring to actually see that they actually have plans for, 3, 4 areas, that these are our primary area for this season, and we're going to move here. And they're willing to sit and work with the city on how they can help through their communication strategy of delivering some of this message out to the public as well.
Great. Well, just to wrap up then, I really look forward to what FireSmart does in my ward community of Maryvale Gardens, because that could be like the test case of vulnerable areas in close proximity to heavily populated urban areas, in immediate proximity to a massive city asset, i.e. the Nepean Sportsplex. So seeing the results of FireSmart in that area and then measuring the changes that come from it, I really look forward to that. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Plante.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour la présentation. Je voulais simplement savoir si vous pouvez juste faire quelques propos au sujet des encampements qu'on a ici au centre-ville. Comme vous savez, il y a souvent des feux avec les encampements. Et puis, notre canopée dans le centre-ville, il est très limité dès le comme maintenant. Et puis, avec les feux, ça se réduit. Et en plus, on est un îlot de chaleur. Alors, tous ces facteurs font que je me soucie vraiment des campements qu'on a parce que, comme vous savez, la crise du logement s'amplifie. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, conseillère Plante. Oui, il y a toujours des dangers avec les encampements. La ville a une équipe qui répond aux dangers, aux risques des encampements. Avec l'équipe de Roger puis l'équipe de pompiers qui répond pour faire la prévention, l'éducation. C'est triste qu'on a encore des situations où on a des feux. On essaie de prendre ces situations-là puis faire une éducation à tout le monde pour essayer d'empêcher des feux dans le futur. Je demanderais à Chef Hutt de donner un couple de commentaires. Il va les donner en anglais, mais c'est
bien.
C'est bien. OK.
So we're certainly thank you, Chair. For the encampments that we're starting to see, there's no doubt that there is an increase that we're seeing fires within these encampments, and often they have to be handled with kid gloves. I think sometimes they're, the small fires that they have is that, they're doing it for warmth or for other reasons, but quite often they're not very safe. And so what we, there's combustible material, there's possibility of, harm whenever, it's not contained. So we have to look at that very serious as well. And it's important that we work with all our city agencies. This is not a problem for one agency to resolve. It's a situation where all the services have to work together. We have to find solutions, but we are starting now as a fire service, because this is a trend not just in the city of Ottawa. This is a trend in a lot of large cities right now, where we're tracking how many fires, where the encampments are, and we're working very closely with the city encampment group to find out, what we can do to help, even to a point where, not from an enforcement or a punitive perspective, but from a fire safety perspective, how can we go and help? And if there's any recommendations that we can offer, that is our goal.
So just to quickly follow up then, do we have any statistics, because there are encampments too on NCC land that are outside of downtown. Do we have any statistics about the fires that are caused in the urban encampments versus the, suburban or outer encampments?
Yeah, so I don't have that information today, Councillor. I apologize. We are tracking where the encampment fires are, so we certainly have that information. We've just recently started to collect that information as one of our data points. So we don't have a lot of historical data, but we certainly do over the last year or so on that. And it's just we would have to break it down as to where this is occurring. Majority of the encampments, though, are in the downtown area.
Wonderful. Merci beaucoup, j'apprécie.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, back to the Vice Chair.
Thank you. Just back to the questions my colleagues was asking about the Penny Forest. Is that one of the 3 or 4 areas that you've identified with the NCC that in fact is prioritized?
Chair, yes, it is. And actually, there are 3. That is one area that has been identified for this cycle. So they, speaking with the NCC right now, they're working on that request for proposal. And once they have that, they anticipate that the work will occur towards the fall into the winter. So it'll be cleaned up for spring of 2025.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. Any last questions? Nope. So is this presentation received? Received. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item is 6.1 Bylaw Regulatory Services 2023 Annual Report. So there will be a staff presentation. We do have delegations, and then we'll get to questions once we've welcomed our public delegations. So we'll make a change here of staff. Good morning to our friends in Bylaw, and General Manager, do you want to start off?
Once again, thank you, Chair. I am extremely proud of the work that our bylaw officers do. I'm also very thankful for Councillor Devine's comments about the quality of the leadership in our department. I also tip my hat off to the leaders. We have amazing people, and that's why I'm successful, because I surround myself with people who are much smarter than me. But at the end of the day, we have great people, and I'm very thankful of that. And Roger is one of them. So I'll pass this on to Director to Director Chapman to start his presentation, and we'll be open for questions afterwards. Thank you.
Morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to present our 2023 Bylaw and Regulatory Services Annual Report. I'd like to first thank a couple people that have helped with the preparing this report and some of the data gathering and things that have to the work that goes into developing this report. So Rachel Siri and Nathan Ludliev from the BTSS unit in the GMO. So I'd like to thank them. And I have members of our executive team here today. So I have Alison Sandor, who's going to help with the presentation, who's our public information officer. I have Christine Hartig here from Operational Support and Regulatory Services. I have Jennifer Thurkelson from Bylaw, Program Manager of Bylaw Enforcement. And I have Kayla Woods, who's our Issues Management Coordinator. Did I miss anybody? Oh, and Mike Lalonde's also here, who are Program Manager of Parking Enforcement. Next slide, please. So Bylaw and Regulatory Services is made up of 222 FTEs and is responsible for the enforcement and administration of more than 50 municipal bylaws, as well as provincial acts within the boundaries of the City of Ottawa. On an annual basis, we handle 100,000 service requests and operate 144 hours per week on a near 24-hour service model. We strive to provide a level of performance that meets the expectations of residents and visitors to Ottawa. In addition to its normal day-to-day operations, Bylaw and Regulatory Services provides enforcement support for our city partners, which includes Infrastructure and Water Services Department, Recreation, Culture and Facility Services Department, Office of Emergency Management, and Ottawa Public Health, among others. Next slide, please. Bylaw and Regulatory Services is organized into 4 branches in a director's office. The 4 branches are Bylaw Enforcement Services, Licensing Administration and Enforcement, Parking Enforcement and Logistics, Operational Support and Regulatory Services. It should also be noted that there is a 5th branch as of 2024. The Automated Speed Enforcement Center became operational in Q1 of 2024 and will be reflected in our 2024 annual report. The Bylaw Enforcement Services branch is responsible for the general bylaw enforcement, including animal care and control, noise, parks and facilities, property standards, and zoning enforcement. Licensing Administration Enforcement branch is responsible for the administration and enforcement of the licensing bylaw, the vehicle for hire bylaw, business ambassador program, enforcement of provincial and municipal smoke-free regulations, lotteries on behalf of the province, short-term rental licensing. The Operational Support and Regulatory Services branch is responsible for the general administration, communications, training coordination, and oversight of the spay and neuter clinic. The parking enforcement and logistics branch is responsible for all procurements within bylaw and regulatory services and parking enforcement citywide. And finally, the director's office is responsible for decision-making, strategic planning, providing subject matter expertise, and acting as a primary BLRS information broker. Next slide, please. In addition to supporting our partners at the City of Ottawa, Bylaw and Regulatory Services prides itself in being a leader in municipal enforcement within the province of Ontario. BLRS currently undertakes many unique responsibilities which many other jurisdictions in Ontario do not, including enforcement of the Smoke-Free Ontario Act, noise bylaw enforcement, public engagement and outreach through a dedicated public information officer, and large wild mammal emergency response. These programs allow Bylaw and Regulatory Services to offer residents more specialized and timely services. Next slide, please.
Le travail des services des règlements municipaux se divise en deux grandes catégories. Les réponses aux demandes de services auxquelles on a été attribué un niveau de priorité en fonction du type d'appel et d'autres activités de travail qui ne font pas l'objet d'une demande de service. Par exemple, les patrouilles proactives, le temps passé devant un tribunal, ainsi que le travail administratif. Nous suivons toujours les normes de service subséquentes. Pour les appels de priorité 1, qui sont les plus importantes, les services des règlements municipaux répondent en 24 heures et ce, dans 80% des cas. Pour les appels de priorité 2, nous répondons en 48 heures et ce, dans 80% des cas. Pour les appels de priorité 3, nous répondons en 96 heures et ce, en 80% des cas. Prochaine carte, s'il vous plaît. Next slide. Les réussites, excusez-moi, les tendances en matière de rendement. Alors, en 2022, les services des règlements municipaux ont traité plus de 93 000 demandes de services. Nous avons dépassé la norme de services de 80% des appels de priorité 1 et 2 par 16% et 10% respectivement. Les appels de priorité 3 ont respecté la norme dans 77% des cas, soit 3% de moins de la norme de service. En 2023, les services et règlements municipaux ont traité plus de 100 000 demandes de services. Au cours de cette période, les SRM ont dépassé la norme de service de 80% pour les appels de priorité 1 et 2. Les appels de priorité 3 ont respecté la norme dans 73% des cas, soit 6,5% de moins que la norme de service. Next slide, please.
Last year, we brought on our largest contingent of summer students in order to better serve the community. Their responsibilities included parking control, licensing, patrolling more parks than ever before. Our short-term rental enforcement team worked diligently to issue nearly 540 permits and to ensure the compliance of hundreds of short-term rentals across the city. In 2023, we also rolled out Bylaw's very own peer support network, a highly anticipated and much-needed service to foster well-being amongst our staff. In an effort to further protect consumers, the tow truck licensing team performed inspections of nearly 270 tow trucks, while also ensuring drivers and companies adhere to the stringent regulations set forth in the licensing bylaw. In 2023, the vacant property bylaw came into effect, with 125 permits issued that encompass a total of 508 addresses. This strategy allows the city to take further action to hold property owners accountable for the state of vacant buildings across the city of Ottawa. Another significant success in 2023 was the completion of the planning and creation of the Automated Speed Enforcement Processing Center. Staff were onboarded and trained, and the center is now operational. Next slide, please. Over the rest of this term of council, Bylaw and Regulatory Services intend to undertake some notable strategic initiatives. BLRS will include implementing an online licensing payment system. It is anticipated that such a digital checkout option would improve efficiency and reduce wait times, while also in providing a superior client experience. BLRS will also begin phase 1 of its retrofit of headquarters. This phase includes a number of improvements of the aging facility at 735 Industrial. Construction of a service counter on the first floor, upgrades to existing staff washrooms, and an addition of a fully accessible washroom for clients. Reconfiguration and upgrades to workspace for staff and accessible workstations and meet cash handling requirements. The result would approximately increase about 9,000 square feet of space at BLRS's headquarters. In 2023, $1 million in funding was allocated to accommodate this phase of the project. In addition to these strategic initiatives, Bylaw and Regulatory Services intends to continue engaging with stakeholders and collaborating with BIAs and community groups to inform and develop the future of public policy initiatives. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that overview on what has been or what was a busy year. So thank you, Chief Chapman and Ms. Sander. Colleagues, I draw your attention. We did receive one written correspondence from a Ms. Jones. So I draw your attention to that if you want to see that in the shared drive. And now we will receive public delegations. So we have 5 delegates who will speak to this matter. And I call upon the first delegate, Ms. Emily Quayle. Please step forward. Ms. Sander, do you mind just making some space here? Just right here to the first mic. We'll bring a chair over. There we go. So you just use that microphone and there's a button at the bottom there. You press that and all delegates have 5 minutes. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So thank you very much to the councillors and the city staff here for your hard work and for this opportunity for me to speak to this annual bylaw report. In a letter to community members and partners dated February 23rd of this year, the Chief of Police compared the number of bylaw fines given during protests and labor actions for the years 2022, 2023, and 2024. On the page 8 of the printed report that we all have refers to the declining number of noise complaints. But the police letter in February reported, citing bylaw's own numbers, that there were 17 fines related to protests in just the first 2 months of 2024, 31 fines in 2023, and only 22 fines in all of 2022. The trend of fining organizers and marshals using megaphones under Noise Bylaw 2017-255 Section 3 began in late December 2023, which is why I am here today speaking to this annual report that unfortunately does not discuss how or why that policy change occurred. And I'm very aware that this report is a reflection of the big picture and is therefore limited in its ability to drill down into the very specifics. However, community members, including myself, have witnessed a massive change in the way that bylaw interacts with us as we engage in nonviolent, charter-protected protests and strikes for our collective rights. Not only have fines been handed out at an unprecedented rate at protests and strikes, bylaw has also engaged in intimidation tactics, 2 of which include following a racialized community member into a parking garage to find them, and another arriving at another community member's home late at night to find them. This 2023 annual report provides enforcement data and program details, but the report contains no mention of this very obvious policy change that occurred in December of 2023 in regards to megaphone use at protests. The presentation of the enforcement data shows that noise complaints are declining, but in December, bylaw suddenly began fining protesters for ordinary megaphone use at an unprecedented rate above that seen during all of 2022. And the communities affected by this have submitted access to information requests, held meetings with many of you here, and sent over 1,000 emails to various councillors asking for action on this matter. However, the public is still in the dark about why and how this change happened and why it appears now to be suddenly reverted. So since this dramatic shift occurred, community members and representatives from a variety of organizations have been in dialogue with many of you, including myself. We formed a coalition to engage further with you, yet our press conference outside this very building was met by City Hall going into a lockdown in response to us. There is no accountability or transparency regarding why protests were suddenly targeted by bylaw or why that crackdown on protests suddenly stopped. As the chief of police has stated in that February letter, the police expect demonstrations to continue. And on this, I can agree with him. The rise of hate against the queer and trans community and the ongoing genocide in Gaza, just to name two existential threats in the last calendar year, have motivated so many people, wonderful residents of this city, to demand change from all levels of government. A crackdown on our rights to protest has no place in a democratic society. And the most basic of democratic principles should guide us toward transparency and accountability on why the fines started and why they then stopped. I fear we have lost trust in our city to do the right thing by its residents.
1 minute.
I feel like my city has left us all wondering when the next time bylaw or other enforcement agencies will arbitrarily crack down on protest based on what I can only surmise are mysterious decisions made behind closed doors. These bylaws, like all laws, are our bylaws and laws. And we have a right to know why they have been selectively applied starting in December 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quill, for your presentation. I do see a question from my colleague, Conseiller Plant.
Thank you so much for being here. My ward, as you know, sees a lot of protest, and we currently have the Gaza encampment happening right now on the Tabaret lawn. So thank you for being here. I was just wondering, what do you what would you like to see changed?
Specifically, I would like to see a change to the bylaw that we were fined under. We were fined because we didn't have a special event permit, which would then guarantee others to have protests. But the thing is that we are all of the fundamental belief and knowledge that we don't need to apply for permission to exercise our charter rights. And it's sort of an unnecessary step, especially for spontaneous protests, and an unnecessary hindrance on our charter rights to protest if we have to file papers, especially because some of the special events bylaws indicate that you have to have some kind of insurance and liability and all these other things that, quite frankly, grassroots organizations and simply speaking truth to power, it's not compatible with that kind of level of bureaucracy. I also would like to see bylaw and other enforcement agencies respect the fact that protests are not the first line of action for people. We don't go into the streets as the first step. It's often after we haven't been heard for months or years or decades in some of the cases of the issues that we see on the streets today. Environmental protests and strikes as well have been targeted. These are people that need to be listened to rather than policed or managed. Like, we're not an issue to be controlled. We're people that deserve to be heard, because we don't go out in the streets as the first step to change. We go there when we haven't been heard in other avenues.
Yeah, I was just wondering, further to that, have you spoken to your provincial member of parliament or I was just wondering what kind of advocacy you've done on that level as well?
I've done a ton. I have spoken to the MPP. No, it's fine. I'm happy to share. I've spoken to my MPP. I've spoken to several councillors. I have organized with other community groups to learn about the history of this bylaw taking change. I've cooperated with other residents who have filed access to information requests to try to understand what happened. But none of these have provided me with an answer really of why they started and why they stopped. Especially in terms of getting an amendment to this bylaw. tabled at committee has so far proved relatively unsuccessful. I think part of the reason is that there is an Engage Ottawa scheduled review of the special events bylaw coming up, but this doesn't really qualify as a special event because protests shouldn't be considered as something that should be applying for a permit. And this is a change that we can do sort of proactively now together, given the amount of evidence that we have before us about this sort of unfairness and arbitrary nature and unknown decision that was made in policy.
No, I don't have any more questions, but I just wanted to thank you for your advocacy.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Emily. And I will be asking questions to staff when we get to that point about any forthcoming processes. But I do want you to know that there's certainly, you know, I'll just speak for myself. I do have a concern that I want to see Ottawa, the capital of a G7 country, as a city that supports peaceful protest. The question I have for you, you made reference to, and I'm not an expert on this, but you made reference to a policy change in December 2023.
Yeah.
Can you clarify, was there a policy change or was there a change in the enforcement of the policy?
I don't know. I can only surmise that it was a policy change because I, for one, have been very involved in the defense of queer and trans rights for over a year now in the city. And using megaphones has never been a problem because it's a safety tool and it's a pretty common tactic. And of course it's noisy, but there's a large crowd of people. So I have never been fined before. And then all of a sudden something changed in December 2023. I think it was the 23rd of December that the first sort of round of fines, and it was a heavy amount of fines that began. So this bylaw having never been used, some change must have happened. And then the sudden stop of it in February, that indicates to me that yet another sudden change happened. And I can only guess that if the bylaw didn't change, a decision was made somewhere to change it and then stop it.
Okay. Thank you, Emily.
You're welcome.
And Councillor Johnson has a question. Councillor? Just unmute, Lane, if you could unmute, please. Councillor Johnson, just 1 second. We cannot hear you at this time. To see if we can get the audio. No.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you for your patience. So, thank you, Mr. Chair, for helping me to be heard. And thank you, Emily, for your presentation. I would just like to get a sense from you, Emily, you know, within the community, what effect has some of your observations had on public participation in protest?
You mean like how have these fines affected?
Yeah, how the perceptions of you know, a lack of transparency or an increase in arbitrary fining, how has that affected communities that are trying to you know, advocate for their rights?
One, fear. We're watching the way that police treat us as well, which is also sharply changed, unfortunately. And we're seeing this as a progressive and steady assault on democratic rights to protest, not just in Ottawa, but it's in line with other trends in other major cities across North America and Europe. I think that it's something that makes us very acutely aware that we are being viewed as a problem rather than something to be someone to be listened to and heard, to be worked with on these really big issues that face us all. So aside from that fear, we also turn to look at the city and the services that are supposed to ostensibly provide us with some degree of safety and security and some degree of comfort and ability to live productively in this city. but we view it as it looks like a waste of time. It looks like a waste of money to be coming after us and policing us unnecessarily. The violence that I've seen at protests come from police wearing with weapons, or from Zionists accosting me on the street for wearing keffiyeh, which happened yesterday. I think that that fear that we have that our rights are being quashed has two effects. One, it makes us a little bit more strengthened in a sense to continue to speak out, because we see the importance. If someone's trying to tell us to be quiet for advocating for anti-war, which is a pretty basic idea, that we feel the need to continue to show up. But at the same time, it also has a huge quell on our comfort being out in our streets. Being afraid of people in uniform is a very new experience for many non-racialized and white members of the community, but it's not new for others. And we don't need that. We don't need to have that additional pressure on community. I'm particularly worried about getting fined arbitrarily the next time I go to a protest, and the amount of time that it requires all of us to organize together, to desperately find lawyers and help with fighting this, to advocate. It takes time away from all of the other things and all the reasons why we were in the street in the first place. Being burdened with multiple fines in many cases is, I think, grossly unfair and completely reduces any trust that we might have in not just our elected representatives, but the city staff that help run and provide many of our essential services.
Thank you for that. And certainly I would agree with you that there's currently a lot of fear in a lot of communities. And, you know, I would suggest that there are certainly people that feel excluded from voicing their concerns from many members of the community, whether that's LGBTQ, whether that is Jewish communities that want to, you know, have a space to grieve and to protest war as well. They've, you know, in my community in College Ward, certainly they're feeling that their voice can't be properly expressed. I think the focus on, you know, what democratic rights we have to dissent is essential for this conversation and is mutually shared by all members of the community, and certainly something the city should be paying attention to. So I really appreciate your time and energy today for bringing that forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson, and Ms. Quell, thank you for your delegation and taking a number of questions. I do invite you to remain to hear our discussion and questions to staff in a few minutes, so thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Okay, Cheryl Parrott. I don't see Cheryl in the gallery. She's online. Very good. Ms. Parrott?
Yes, I'm here.
Good to see you. You have 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much. Chair and councillors, I hope you will look at increasing the budget to hire more staff. You really need more staff in bylaw. The annual report was really quite revealing. I mean, they go from pets to taxis to lotteries to moose and bears, parking, A-frame signs blocking sidewalks, murals, short-term rentals, and of course, noise is a big one. Off-leash dogs in no-dog parks is an increasing issue, especially with intensification that we're seeing certainly in the inner part of the city. And possibly, well, that's going to change as the new zoning bylaw happens. And so bylaw is really a catch-all for anything that doesn't fit anywhere else. I've asked some questions, who does this? And it always ends up having to be bylaw. So even compliance with committee of adjustment decisions, compliance with site plan decisions like garbage placement that isn't following what was in the site plan. So a 7.6% increase in service requests is huge. When you're looking at a range of 100,000 calls, that's still a big number of increased calls. And I've seen bylaw not able to keep up with demand and not able to get back to inspect by the due date of an order. Officers work hard, but if they keep falling further behind, then I would think job satisfaction decreases. And that's a job that gets a lot of unpleasant responses in the first place. So please think about retention of staff. If you're not in a job where you have satisfaction, that can be a big issue. We've seen it in other sectors. When the vacant property permit system came out requiring a contact number be posted, we tried calling that contact number directly to ask them to fix the problem as a way of taking some burden off of bylaw for tall weeds, unsecured outbuildings, et cetera, but very few complied. So it's back to just calling bylaw again. The city needs to budget to increase staffing bylaw. On page 8 and 9 of the report, it shows a huge increase in property standards calls from 2018 to 2023. It's almost a 30% increase. And licensing increased in that same time period. It tripled. Response times have decreased. The service request per bylaw officer is almost double what it is for Toronto and much higher than Hamilton and Windsor. So really, why would you want to work in Ottawa, quite frankly? Doing more with less has a finite life. And at some point, you have the straw that breaks the camel's back. So please look at that, providing staff retention and a good work environment, and so they can actually do their job within the time limits that we've come to expect. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parrott, for your delegation and your analysis of the data that's presented in the report and for highlighting a number of matters. I do have a question from my colleague, Conseiller Plante.
Thank you. It's actually just not a question. I just wanted to thank you, Cheryl. I know you've been in community advocacy on this very specific issue for quite some time, and you were just extremely helpful when we were looking at our problematic addresses. You were helpful in, finding documents that had related to things to before I was elected. So just giving you your flowers. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I see no other hands. So Ms. Parrott, thank you very much for your presentation this morning. Okay, Menashe Spivak-Sladowski, welcome. There should be a button on the microphone right there. You have 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for taking the time to hear the voices of citizens and constituents. December 23rd, 2023, at a protest against Canada investing in another country's military war crimes, bylaw issued tickets to protesters using megaphones and speakers under noise bylaw 2017-255. In all of the protests I have been to in this city, I have never seen this bylaw enforced. The enforcement of this bylaw on this group, while several other gatherings of people using sound amplification devices did not receive the same surveillance nor issuing of tickets, has only gotten worse. Sound amplification devices such as megaphones and microphone speaker setups are necessary tools for communication required for safe and effective crowd management. Punishing the use of this tool or these tools invites chaos and unsafe environments. After the ticketing precedent was set in December 2023, persons protesting against the hosting of an out-of-province politician known for her transphobic rhetoric were issued noise violation tickets for use of megaphones. In 2023, union workers striking and rallying to improve their working conditions had been intimidated by Ottawa bylaw by once again selective enforcement of bylaw 2017-255. Union workers were penalized for engaging in decade-old practices of peaceful protesting. The change that began in 2023 has had major effects on residents voicing their opinions during a press conference held outside City Hall, given by a coalition raising awareness of the unreasonable and prejudiced issuing of these tickets used to silence protesters. City Hall went into lockdown procedure, even though no participants of the press conference had approached the building or spoke out about aggression towards the building or its occupants. The trend of bylaw partnering with police to heavily enforce the fines against participants of the weekly protests against the government's support of the current genocides around the world has portrayed the group as delinquent. As a result, people who have frequented protests have been told they are not allowed into City Hall, including to get to and from their car. And in one instance, a citizen who uses a walker was forced to carry it down the stairs to get to their car instead of using the elevator. The City of Ottawa has never enforced this bylaw and currently only selectively enforces it. The most reasonable move would be to amend this bylaw to exempt persons participating in protests and strikes. In the meantime, citizens deserve transparency and reasoning as to why only some citizens are subject to hefty fines for exercising charter rights of peaceful assembly and protesting. What this report does not portray are calls to which response time is suboptimal due to triaging lower than other calls. How much overtime is allocated to surveillance and ticketing of special events or protests, and reasoning behind selective enforcement of certain bylaws. Over 1,000 emails have been sent to city councilors on the topic of noise violation bylaw 2017-255. Still, this committee refuses to discuss the issue publicly, knowing it is a cause of concern for residents across the city. Some city councilors have responded saying that it isn't within their scope to address, while at least some of the city councilors, or one, have showed up uninvited at a constituent's home in response to receiving an email regarding the matter. When our city removes peaceful channels for citizens to have their voices heard, not only do citizens feel dismissed and silenced, the city is encouraging escalation, the opposite of providing safety. Protesting a charter rights has been impeded by Ottawa bylaw, selective enforcement of noise violation bylaws around use of a megaphone. An exemption from protesters from this bylaw is the most reasonable solution, but the notes above look into what voices Ottawa bylaw has attempted to silence and why this is a dangerous, slippery slope to begin. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your delegation as well. I'll just look to my colleagues.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Thank you. Again, just similar to your colleague, I just wanted to thank you for your advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do invite you to remain in the gallery because there will be questions and debate that will follow. Thank you very much. The next delegation is from Hassan Husseini. Is our delegate online? Hassan Husseini. We will hold this and we'll go to the fifth delegation, Thomas Dedman. Is Mr. Dedman online? So the committee coordinator is confirming that neither Hassan Husseini nor is he online? Okay. So we think we have Hassan Husseini. Are you online now?
Yes, I am here. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so you
Sorry,
have
my name was under an organizational name. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today as a longtime resident of Ottawa. Once again, my name is Hassan Husseini. I am by profession a national negotiator with the Public Service Alliance of Canada, one of the largest public sector unions in the country. I'm also an organizer and a member of Labour for Palestine Canada, one of the organizations involved in Palestine solidarity advocacy in the community and the labor movement. I've been a resident of Ottawa since 1985, and during that time, of course, went to high school, graduated, have graduate degrees from the University of Ottawa and Carleton University. I taught at both universities for a period of time as a social justice activist and a labor activist in the city of Ottawa. I've seen a lot of things over the decades and over the years. I want to thank Mr. Chapman, of course, for the presentation on the report. I've had a chance to read the report. My comments are addressed to what's perhaps missing from the report and providing some context in relation to some of the stats that were included in there. One of the main issues that we've encountered in 2023, and it's missing in terms of context from the report itself, is what others have spoken about today, and that is the unprecedented and what I would even call an uneven and unknown, in the sense that where it's coming from, whether it's a political direction of change of policy, that's something that we would like to get to the bottom of it. An uneven, unprecedented, and I would say an unfair level of enforcement of certain bylaws, specifically in relation to protests. I'm in particular zeroing in on legitimate, charter protected and constitutionally protected strikes of workers across the city, as well as protests against the genocide that is taking place in Gaza and has been for the past 7 months. I would argue that what we've witnessed in 2023 is unprecedented on many levels, and I'll give you a little bit of examples of what we saw in April, just over a year ago, during the PSAC's federal public sector strike. There were 8 tickets that were issued against the union and activists within the union for having a hot dog stand to feed striking workers, those workers that were on a very limited income during the strike, and their colleagues, with the support, of course, of the union, put up a hot dog stand that didn't encroach on the highways, didn't encroach on the streets, didn't encroach on the pedestrians. Yet the city and the bylaw officers saw it fit to impose on them some harsh fines at that time. There were a number of fines issued then. Afterwards, there were 2 tickets that were issued for foldable chairs and canopy tents at Tunney's Pasture, again during the strike itself. Something we've never seen before. I've been around strikes and major events of the labor movement in Ottawa for a very long time, and this is unheard of, that we were witness to such enforcement of these kind of actions. There was 1 ticket that was issued for unnecessary noise given to a union member who was honking their car in support of striking workers. Go anywhere in the country and you'll see that is a legitimate form of support. Yet again, the city bylaw officers felt that they needed to do that. All of these, of course, I would opinion that they are in violation of our charter rights as citizens, as residents of the city of Ottawa, to engage in various forms of peaceful protest in order to express our opinions and views.
1 minute.
Of course, the major issue was in 2023, the end of the year, where city bylaw began the imposition of noise bylaws against Palestine solidarity protesters, anti-genocide protesters in Ottawa. There was a level of aggression from the bylaw officers that we haven't witnessed before. It started in December 2023 and it ended in February 2024 when the bylaw officers followed young Muslim women into the parking lot in order to issue them tickets. That was very threatening, very aggressive behavior on behalf of bylaw that really led the community. And by the community, I mean the labor, the Muslim, the Arab community, the Jewish community that were in solidarity with the Palestinian people, to feel alienated, to feel that the city is targeting them for the advocacy, the peaceful advocacy that they have. And there is a great deal of mistrust that they have as a result of this with the city, with the bylaw, and with policing. Our call is on the city is to be proactive around this issue, to change the bylaws, to create this exemption for peaceful protests that are guaranteed and protected by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as well as the Constitution, and at the same time, in order to make sure that we have a robust democracy and participation from all residents and citizens in the city of Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Husseini. Right on time there with your 5 minutes. I'm just going to look to see if my colleagues have any questions for you. I don't see any hands, so thank you, sir, for your delegation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have Thomas Dedman we're still trying to reach. We think we might be able to make a connection here, so we're just going to give our committee coordinator some time.
Mr. Chair, I just want to ensure we have quorum as well.
We do have quorum. So we do not have a Mr. Dedman online, so that will conclude our delegations at this time. And happy to receive questions from members of the committee if you want to so acknowledge. Before we begin, we've heard a number of concerns raised by members of the public, and I'd like to know whether either the general manager or the chief have any comments to start off with.
Thank you, Chair, for that opportunity. I'll start by just making a few points. One is that protests fall under police jurisdiction. They're responsible for keeping the peace in these types of situations. Secondly, it's our view, or it's my view, and it's my experience that protests have become a lot more aggressive. And Director Chapman will speak specifically to how they're dealing with those situations. And I can reassure you, Chair, that there has been no change in policy. It's perception. And, you know, sometimes people say perception is reality, and that's unfortunate, but there has been no change in policy direction given. Thank you. I'll pass it over to Director Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on this matter. First, I'd like to also thank the delegations for coming out to speak today. You know, feedback from the public, positive and negative, is always very valuable. And, you know, we're always open to hear and understand concerns and criticisms from the public. We understand that, you know, making decisions to issue charges during protests is never a popular decision. We know that we're going to face criticism when we make decisions like this, but we always do this, you know, with integrity and by using discretion. And I can assure you that nobody was charged at any of these protests without being warned several times before a charge was issued. We always exercise a progressive enforcement model. We tried for weeks to try and control some of the noise concerns that we were receiving. We saw that things were escalating during protests, so use of smoke bombs, fireworks. We had officers who were, you know, I won't say assaulted, but shoved or bumped, threatened. There was all kinds of tactics that were happening. The use of the megaphones increased. And I still maintain that, you know, the right to protest, the fundamental right to protest, I can assure you that we understand that everybody has the right to protest, but the key here is to protest peacefully and, you know, creating a disturbance to members of the public who are living in those areas, businesses that are trying to operate businesses that are being impacted because of ongoing protests that you know, have marches that snake through the downtown core that are impacting those businesses. I mean, we were hearing from business owners that people were avoiding the area on Saturday afternoons because they were aware that protests were happening. That has an impact on those businesses. You know, for the most part, the protesters that we spoke to, the organizing group that we speak to on almost a weekly basis, have been very accommodating, been very nice to speak with. We haven't had any conflict with them whatsoever. We've, you know, using discretion to enforce this bylaw, we've allowed for sound reproduction devices through conversation with them, discussion with them, understanding that to ensure the safety of the entire group that's there, we understand that getting the message from the front of the march to the back of the march is very important to ensure safety of those participants at the protest. So we've allowed for sound reproduction devices to be used in those cases. And, depending on the attendance, we've allowed even up to 8 of those sound reproduction devices to ensure that everybody throughout that march can hear the direction that's being given by the marshal. So again, I appreciate the feedback. I know that, it's not the most popular decision. I've talked to, I think, just about every councillor, and I've tried to, express our concerns as well, and that it's, we're doing this with discretion and integrity, and the people that are being charged, there's a reason why they're being charged. I don't want to get into specific circumstances. These matters are still considered before the court. So we'll see how that plays out in the coming weeks. So thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you to you both. I will take questions now, starting with the Vice Chair and then Councillor Desroches and Plante.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the report. Thank you for all the good work this year. A couple questions, all of them are fairly separate. For licensing calls, we saw a call volume increase of nearly 2,500 calls from 2021 to 2022, and that number has largely been sustained here in 2023. In your report, you speak to the new approach to short-term rentals and tow truck bylaws as being partially responsible for that. Are there any other additional explanations for the increased call volume?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor, for the question. Those are really the two major drivers to that increase in licensing activity, as the short-term rentals and tow trucks. Yes.
And then on to the vacant unit bylaw. Does it have the teeth that it needs to have in order to accomplish the goals that we're trying to accomplish with vacant units? I know that there are a number of different levers that the city are applying to vacant units. Is the deterrent model that we have in the vacant unit bylaw adequate for the outcomes that we're trying to achieve?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. I think I've said this many times publicly before. When a new bylaw is brought in, we always see an increase in service requests, increase in activity in that enforcement area. This is not unlike any other newly introduced bylaw. It's been a challenge in the first year to get out and get permits issued for all these properties. Jen Thurkelson and her team have done a fantastic job in focusing enforcement in this area. And I know that Jennifer just recently has added a couple more resources in the vacant property enforcement team just to get the permits issued. So our focus to start was to get all the permits issued on these properties, and then we'll start to follow up on the other provisions, the requirements for placarding the property to ensure that they're answering the phone when, as Cheryl Parrott spoke to, it's when they're answering the phone when people are calling for long grass complaints and things like that. So that'll be the next phase of the enforcement program.
Thank you very much. And my last question, one of our delegates referred to the need to hire more bylaw. Can you confirm that there are going to be more bylaw that are going to be operating over the next year?
Yes, Chair, I'll take that. I can confirm that we're currently doing a full review of what we need, and it'll be part of the budget process for 2025.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Desroches, you are up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the team for the presentation. This is always a very helpful report that I share with my constituents, because I often do hear, and I think it was stated earlier that, often perception is reality, right? And I think there's a perception that bylaws kind of never there when you need them, or I don't see them. But the report shows, I think, that, of the hundreds of laws that we have to, or you need to enforce, you are devoting significant resources to respond to all parts of the city. One of the concerns I do hear is, again, on that timeliness and a perception that some parts of the city that, for example, have perhaps paid parking, you see a high presence there. And you don't see it kind of in other communities like a suburban community. So I'm wondering if you just comment on your responsiveness to dealing with complaints right across the city, so that there's some equality, if you will, in terms of the expectations of the public for your response. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor, for the question. You know, it is a growing concern for us. We're seeing a trend of increase of parking related complaints, and in responding to those complaints, it's, you know, the officers are getting pulled from their quote unquote beats. So it's, you know, it's not the most efficient or effective way of deploying our parking staff. So, you know, as a result of that, you know, I'm not proud to say, but there has been a bit of a struggle to respond to the increasing complaints that we're seeing, specifically in the suburbs, where we've seen new development and, you know, with the intensification in those areas and limited on-street parking that's available for visitors and residents and things. So we have seen a substantial increase in call volume there, and it has been, you know, a bit of a delay in getting officers out there to respond to those calls. I can say that you know, summer students are here, and we've had you know, as I said in my presentation, a significant increase in summer students. You know, we know that, you know, in reviewing our call data, that 60% of our calls we receive during the 6 warmer months of the season. So the summer students are key in providing the capacity and the ability for us to respond to those increasing calls. So I think you'll see that, you know, over the summer months, it'll be easier for us to respond to those calls utilizing our summer students program.
Thank you. And can you just confirm that you do enforce and that you do a ticket for cases of dog off leash or for owners not picking up pet waste?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yes, absolutely, we do. And again, challenges collecting that evidence, understanding who the person is that's in violation, and you know, being able to substantiate those complaints and having enough evidence to issue that charge.
Okay, thank you. Last question and a comment is, and I've shared this with you, is I don't think we got the timing right on when we have a snow ban, and I just do not understand how the bylaw can't get ahead of the plow. Most oftentimes the plows are on the main roads. The residential roads are still several hours away, and that's when I think you deploy and enforce the on-street parking, versus I hear a lot of complaints that the plow's been by and I got a ticket because I'm moving my car around to you know, to clean up after a big storm. So it really erodes, I think, the confidence in you know, our policy here. And again, why can't we just line it up that you go in ahead of the plow and that's when you enforce the ban, and then after you know, you've got, you know, other parts to go to in the city. So can you just comment on the timing of enforcement?
Mr. Chair, again, thank you, Councillor, for the question. You know, the timing of when an officer is on the street, difficult to say. I can tell you that we do, through complaints that we're receiving, we keep a list of residential areas or specific streets that are problematic from previous parking bans. So those are streets that we're handing out to the officers that are deployed in that area to make sure that we're hitting those streets first. But, you know, at the same time, you know, while the ban is on, the officer will continue to make their rounds through those residential areas, and anybody who's parked on the street could, and you know, in most cases is ticketed, even if the plow's gone by. And often what we see is that, you know, further down the street, there was still a car on the street where a plow had to go around the car. So the plow still needs to come back at a later time to clear that street. So it's important that everybody remain off the street until the ban is lifted entirely.
Sure, and it's not my intent to debate this all day, Mr. Chair, but I think we just need to look at, again, the timing, and then maybe there's a different bylaw that applies here, that there's proof that you impeded the plow. because your car is buried in the windrow, right? You didn't respect it. But the people who, again, the ban's in place because, you know, we haven't done this massive geographical city, but this area has been done. And the intent of the ban has been realized. And again, I just find that there's considerable frustration in terms of the way this is structured, and you know, it's something I'll continue to follow up on. So again, thank you though. However, this has been a helpful report. Thank you, in dialogue.
Great, thank you, Councillor, for your questions. Councillor Plant.
Yes, thank you so much. There was just a reference with the previous delegation about litigation, and I think you mentioned it yourself as well, Roger. Can you just clarify how many court proceedings are going on right now related to this issue, or is that not publicly available?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. I don't have that number in front of me. It is publicly available, but I can follow up with your office later this week with that answer.
Yes, thank you.
That's it, Councillor. Okay, Councillor Devine, Leaper, and then Johnson. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Roger, and to your staff for the report and for all the work you do. The Department of Miscellanea, it would seem like. So I want to talk first. I do want to zero in on the protests issue, and then I do want to have questions about the report in general. So with regards to the comments that you made and the comments from some of the delegates, so no doubt there is an escalation in the number of protests, no doubt. No doubt from what I perceive, and I'm no expert, there was an escalation in the rhetoric, consternation emanating from these protests. No doubt, however, in my mind at least, that there's also an escalation in the response to these protests. But the thing that I walk away from is that those people who are protesting and the residents and businesses that live or work adjacent to those who are protesting, they are all the residents of Ottawa. They are all the residents that I serve. And so I want to speak to ensuring that we have an equal service to them. Because in my opinion, and again, I am not an expert here, but the right to protest, the right to dissent in a free and healthy democracy, in my opinion, is quite likely enshrined at a higher level than the right to not be inconvenienced. The delegate has made it clear, and I've seen this throughout history, when people try some measures that are not responded to, they take to the streets. It is not meant to be a comfortable, convenient thing. It is meant to be disruptive because other channels are not working. Whether or not these protesters are trying all other channels before they get there, I don't know, but some of them quite likely are there because there was no other recourse. And so what I want to ask, I appreciate that there was a change in December 2023 and then a change again, perhaps in the other direction in February 2024. I do not recall the number of tickets issued for megaphones in 2022 compared to 2023. But for right now, I just want to look forward. So I kind of asked you this question earlier. So as I understand it, there are processes forthcoming where the city will be exploring potential changes either to the noise bylaw or the special event bylaw where some of these issues can be addressed. Could you please speak to what processes might be forthcoming and the scope of issues that might be on the table during this review?
Chair, I can speak to the reviews. Part of the policy review process for this term of council includes a review of the special events bylaw, which also includes special events on roads and protests. So that will look at a lot of these issues and will address it. I don't believe that there's currently an activity to change the noise bylaw. And if that's the will of council, that's where that will have to come from.
Well, I'll certainly follow up with the chair and my colleagues to try to identify what might be on the table as we address that. What I'm looking for is that the city of Ottawa continues to be a city where the right to peaceful protest can be supported. Questions just to the annual report. So I'm going to follow up on what the delegate Cheryl Parrott was saying when she listed that huge list of stuff you have to take care of. And I'm concerned about the impact that growth in the city in general, and even as specifically as what comes out of the new zoning bylaw, the impact that's going to have on you. A 7.6 spike in your service calls is huge. If you are having big spikes on parking enforcement, and we go in place of having no parking minimums, that's going to have a spike on you. You had a significant spike. I can't find it right in my notes. You had a significant spike in property standards enforcement. And the rationale that was articulated was that if I can find it, the increase in property standards calls can likely be attributed to intensification, population growth, and aging infrastructure. Well, guess what? That spike's going to keep on trending upwards. And so what I want to ask of you, Mr. Chapman, I have appreciated that you have been very judicious in your demand for resources on a year-to-year basis, and I'm only on year 3. I have appreciated the candor from, let's say, Chief of Paramedic Service when he says, here's what I need because of a crisis. Ottawa Police Services has no qualms telling me what they need. I really hope that we see in 2025 a request from your office for additional FTEs. I urge bylaw to take a similar approach in identifying the challenges before you and bringing a budget to us that reflects that challenge, and then you let us decide among competing demands from competing departments how best we can serve the city. So I just urge you to look at the crisis before you in terms of the spike and come back to us with the need. As I looked at your data for your performance standards for the 3 priority categories, on average, there's a 5% trend downward of meeting our performance standards. Unless you offload areas of responsibility or unless we hand you more resources, I don't see how that trend downward can be reversed. So I will appreciate if you come to us with a budget that will reflect that challenge. Thank you, Chair.
I think staff have noted that before and have noted again. So thank you, Councillor. Okay, Councillor Leeper and then Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, Roger and Kim. To come back to the protest for a moment, I just want to pick up on the reviews of the special events bylaw that are coming up. And I want to confirm that you would consider that to be an appropriate place at which any motions might be brought to eliminate the prohibition against amplified noise in the right-of-way, or at least create an exemption for protest and similar uses.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yeah, I mean, again, when the report comes forward, there will be recommendations from staff, and that will be an opportunity for, obviously, for councillors to bring motions or provide comment and feedback. But I think what's important in the process is that public consultation is going to occur over the next several months, and feedback from the public will drive the decisions and the recommendations that'll come from staff.
Okay, you and I obviously have had a lot of conversations about this, and I appreciate the change in the exercise of discretion that we've seen for several months now. But the use of amplified noise in the course of protests and civil disobedience is, I think, a sacred ability in Canada. You are following, I assume, the court cases with respect to the tickets that have been issued that are being contested. If the first court determines that those tickets are not valid, do you have any idea of what the approach is that you would take with respect to enforcement moving forward?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor. I'm actually going to defer this question to Jennifer and legal. Just the prosecution has carriage of those files once the charge is issued.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, at the moment, these matters are before the court, so we can't comment on the status, but we'll be providing further updates as the matters progress.
Okay, my hope would be that we would react to a decision that those tickets are invalidated, not with appeal, but to hear the message of the court. But of course, we'll have to wait to see how the court rules. So So the second one, I appreciate the intervention from Cheryl with the Hintonburg Community Association. Obviously, we all tend to turn to her for an understanding of what's going on the ground out there with bylaw. And Roger, I know you have a good relationship with her. Roger, can you tell us more about what your approach is to determining what your budget ask will be? I know you're reviewing it. You and I have spoken about, well, if there's a 7% increase in calls, does that mean you need a 7% increase in the officer complement? But what are some of the perspectives you're taking on your budget ask? Because budget is coming up pretty quickly now.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. That analysis is ongoing. So, I mean, we're looking at other mitigation strategies. So I spoke to the summer student program. We saw a substantial increase in summer students last year in 2023. And again, same number of summer students here in 2024. And I don't want to underestimate the magnitude of having that many summer students. Again, it's a huge undertaking, the onboarding process and, training that that we have to put them through. They all go through a short but fairly vigorous training of 2 weeks before we send them out on the road. But they help with the increase in call volume over the summer months, and without those summer students, I'm not sure that we'd be able to do it. So that's helped, but we have other mitigation strategies. I mean, we're looking at the online licensing solution will certainly help with not just the client experience, but also the work that that our administration staff has to do in supporting those applications and processing payments and things like that. So that'll certainly provide an efficiency for us. And then also nothing bigger than our alternate response program. As far as I know, I think we can still say that we're the only municipality across the province who deploys an alternate response program. It's something that we're pretty proud of. It's Christine Hartig is responsible for alternate response. It's something that we deployed many years ago to try and help with having to have an officer actually attend at an address to respond to a complaint, which we consider a minor violation, where there's no previous history at that address. And we actually have nearly 70% success rate on that, and how we measure that is that we don't get a repeat call, to that address. So that's helped, and we increased that by 1,000 service requests last year. So we went from 4,500 in 2022 to 5,500 in 2023. So that's helped as a mitigation strategy as well. In reviewing some of the data, we're still seeing some anomalies in our data due to the pandemic, 2020 and 2021 specifically. So we're still trying to monitor those trends. And we really felt that we needed another year of looking at our data to make a solid analysis and solid decision on what FTEs or if we need an increase in resources. So still more to come on that. Thank you.
Okay. The concern that I have around summer students is that it's seasonal. So things that are starting to create I don't want to characterize this as overwhelming, but it's getting to the point of being overwhelming with the dogs in parks. Complaints particularly need, physical officers to attend. And during the winter months, we don't have those. So my encouragement would be to seek more full-time officers. It also, I think, helps mitigate some of the summer stories. We're coming up on the slow news season, and almost every councillor around the table has had the experience of having a charge laid that might have been dealt with differently with some discretion, that maybe an experienced officer wouldn't have necessarily given a ticket for this or that before it turns into a CTV story during the slow months. So I like full-time officers, and I'm hoping that you will find a way to quantify what the right number of full-time officers is, and then pursue that with us at budget, because you would definitely have my support. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And, that request and sentiment has been now raised by a number of colleagues, so that's been noted. And I certainly encourage colleagues as you meet with the city manager and the mayor, if this is a priority for you, to raise it with them as well as we start to begin putting together, or not putting together, but start to think towards the 2025 budget. Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Johnson, you're next, and then Councillor Hubley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So my comments are trying to connect the dots between some of the conversations we've had around protests with the resource question. So is it my understanding from your comments at the beginning of this portion of the meeting that it is the police who are coordinating a safety plan or an approach to when we see these protests pop up, and bylaw is deployed based on the police's recommendations?
Thank you, Chair. I can deal with that. Police are ultimately responsible for keeping the peace during protests. So that's their primary responsibility. We have a joint responsibility to enforce the bylaws when necessary. I can assure you that bylaw currently uses an educational component first, where they educate those who are breaching the bylaws on what they need to do. And again, as I indicated earlier, things seem to be getting more aggressive. And as a result of that, there are multiple warnings given, but once people decline or decide not to heed those warnings, then a ticket is issued. And we've had a lot of conversations around this. We understand that. So it's not necessarily, the police don't direct our bylaw resources, but if there's an operational requirement based on public safety or officer safety, then we bow to the police to make that call, since they're responsible for keeping the peace. So it is a joint operation, but there are many discussions with regards to when we issue tickets, when we don't issue tickets, and why we don't issue tickets. Again, it's our call. Our officers have the discretion to do that. So that's about as, I don't know if Roger wants to add anything, but that's the explanation with regards to protests as they fall under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Thank you.
Councillor?
Oh, okay. I couldn't see if Roger was going to add. So certainly I'm not interested in getting into the weeds of directing bylaw. I know that's hugely inappropriate. But I did want to understand what levers we saw pulled at what time, because when we hear from the Ottawa Police, certainly they have expressed that when we do have considerable protest activity in the downtown core, that pulls their resources from other parts of the city. And I wonder whether bylaw has been experiencing any similar pulls on their resources to these protests that would impact other parts of the city. Please.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor. It's a great question. So we don't use our regular deployed officers. So the officers that are on regular shifts and are deployed in certain areas of the city for certain enforcement activity, they're not assigned to protest activity or any kind of special event or anything else that's happening in the city. That's done through officers that we bring in on overtime to cover that activity.
Okay, that's good information as we start looking at the numbers for the 2025 budget. So would you characterize bylaws involvement around the protest activity as being, a sort of more proactive assignment in terms of resources, while the other things listed in your annual report are more complaints based? Is there a difference there in how you deploy?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. Certainly, our attendance or at protests has been in discussion with the Ottawa Police Service. We're there to support. But as far as other activity that we're doing, proactive versus reactive or complaint based, there has been, sort of a change in how we do enforcement with the introduction of new bylaws that have come forward. There's a lot more proactive work that Bylaw and Regulatory Services does that we haven't done in previous years, and specifically, tow trucks. I know we no longer do tow trucks, but speaking specifically to 2023, tow trucks would have been one, vacant properties, certainly short-term rental investigations, that type of activity is increasing, the proactive work that we do.
Okay. Just a final question on what was being said earlier. So GMA, when you described behaviors as becoming more aggressive, is that aggressive behavior that you witnessed or that you perceive something that would trigger a threshold for police intervention versus bylaw intervention? Because again, I would imagine that at some point we're looking at a more criminal action, or is it just people getting frustrated?
It's a combination of both. Some do lead to arrests by police. Again, there's an activity that causes police to arrest. However, we've also seen swarming incidents where a bylaw officer is issuing or giving warnings and issuing tickets, and then they get swarmed. So it's an officer safety issue, and police have to come in and help de-escalate the matter. And move things along. So there's a combination of things, verbal assaults, there's a lot. And all I'm saying is that we're seeing more of it. It seems to be more aggressive. And as a result of that, our attempts to educate and to warn fall on deaf ears, and therefore it leads to violation and tickets.
Okay. All right. I'm just trying to piece together moving forward into 2024 how we can anticipate bylaw resources being used most effectively and when, looking at other protective services. And I would agree with you that I think overall disenchantment and marginalization will ever continue. People are feeling really left out and left behind, and we can anticipate probably a lot more protests in the future, certainly has seen to trend. So I just want to understand tonally, when we're looking at 83% more peers, more calls than your municipal peers, is this something that, and I'm not here, I'm not in the room, and I'm not at all trying to be sassy, so forgive me if it sounds sad. I just want to understand, 83%, is that like a point of pride, or is that like a warning sign for committee today? Like, are you guys like feeling really good about this, what appears to be a huge inflation on duties versus our municipalities, or are you raising the alarm with us?
Thank you, Chair. Great question. I think what we see is, first of all, we're sometimes counting apples and oranges. We're actually doing different work, so the numbers aren't consistent across the province with regards to the activities that those entail. We're reporting those based on an audit recommendation, which required us to report them during the annual process. So we are trying to manage those numbers to try and make them a good comparable. We're finding that difficult, but I'll pass it on to Roger to also speak to that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor, just for clarification, though, the 83% you're speaking to is a 5-year trend. Is that that you're referring to in the report?
Yes, pardon me.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, as GM Ayot's alluded to, I think it's, we often say in bylaw, it's like comparing apples to kangaroos. It's not even apples to oranges anymore. But, municipalities, it's really difficult to compare one municipality to another across the province. And it's, because of the audit recommendation, we are reporting on those comparators the best that we can in the report. And we do, when we ask the other municipalities to provide the FTEs that are, we're very specific in the enforcement activity that we're asking for. So we're asking for licensing, animal services, property standards. So we're asking for very specific enforcement activity. And that's what we report on in our report. So you'll see that we've identified 77 FTEs, that are responsible for those enforcement, because we're trying to make it apples to apples. But it is very difficult, and I'm sure it's not perfect. But we're trying to make that comparator as best that we can. I think what's important here is that we know that what we want to get to is between 650 and 675 service requests per officer. We know that that is a reasonable amount of service requests for our officers to handle. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to achieve. But, you know, again, when we report these SRs per officer, you know, those other mitigation strategies that I talked about, they're also incorporated in those numbers. So what we're trying to do right now is, you know, to make this as a real evidence-based decision on, you know, how many service requests is an officer actually handling. That's what we're doing right now before we come back at budget process. You know, like I've got officers last year that responded to 1,200 calls. You know, that's, you know, we report that 766 is the average. But 1,200 service requests is far too many for an officer to respond to. And that has an impact, not just on the quality of the investigation, but also the end result of that investigation. So
would you suggest then that you're maybe not sounding the alarm, but you are bringing together all of these different mitigation strategies and the trend is continuing?
Mr. Chair, yes. I mean, you know, year after year, we look at these mitigation strategies, but the reality is if the amount of service requests come into bylaw and regulatory services continues to increase, we may not have the resources to be able to respond to those. You can see the numbers over the last, you know, let's just say the last 3 years. You know, I think we started at 860 some per officer. We're now down to 766 per officer. And again, that's an average workload. But, you know, and there has been things like this, you know, budget of 2024, we received 4 additional resources. So 2 of those resources were assigned to property standards. So that's obviously helped with the workload in property standards specifically.
Counselor, I'm just wondering how many more questions you have.
Nope, I concede it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. Counselor Hubley, you're next, and then the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to congratulate GM Ayotte on his retirement, and it was a real honor to go to your retirement party with Councillor Steve DeRoche and represent council at it. And I want to thank you for your service and more importantly, all the positive changes that you made to your department before you were leaving. The succession plans speak for themselves. On the issue of bylaw, I want to lend my support to what many of my colleagues have said, that I would be very supportive to an increase in staffing to address these calls because certainly I hear from my residents the need for a quick response to some of the issues. One in particular is off-leash dogs. Well, we all know and have seen, you know, well-behaved pets that can walk beside their owner, or the owner has total control of their pets and they're never an issue. That's not what this bylaw is targeting. What this bylaw is targeting is aggressive dogs that will attack. Just last week, we were dealing with a message on social media of a family grieving the loss of a 10-year-old pet that had been viciously attacked and was now dying or had passed at that point from that attack. And to me, those are preventable attacks if we can step up the enforcement on off-leash pets. It's only when people get away with it day after day after day that they take these aggressive animals. And I'll be very clear here, Chair. I don't put the blame on the animals. I put it on the owners because every dog can be properly trained and be safe in the environments. But here in my community, as probably the same as others, most of my parks have play areas for children too. And so like last night, for example, I was at a kid's baseball game, and I couldn't get over the fact that there were several off-leash dogs running around while the kids are playing ball. And this is scary. It's only a matter of time that the number of bites are going to increase because people are coming back out to the parks. So I want to stress that. I know, Roger, you do everything you can, and I'm always amazed at how much work you and your team gets done. I just want to lend my support to you getting a bigger team to address these issues so that we don't have to deal with these kinds of tragedies and children getting bites in the summer and everything. So thank you. That's all I want to say, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley, and I do acknowledge that you've raised similar concerns in the past. So thank you for raising this again today. Vice Chair Hill and then Councillor Luloff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up some of my colleagues' questions with regard to the protest bylaw management and noise issues, I guess my very simplistic question is it your professional opinion right now that bylaw has the appropriate policy coverage in order to do the job you need to do today, which allows protesters to freely assemble and speak, while at the same time maintaining peace, order, and good governance?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. And yes, we believe that we have the tools and policies in place.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Luloff, good to see you. You have the floor.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question to Roger, I suppose. Oftentimes we hear complaints in the community about how much of the bylaw enforcement is complaint-based. That some residents feel targeted by their neighbors, and perhaps a bylaw is being used as a tool to get back at neighbors or for other nefarious purposes. I'm wondering if the alternate dispute resolution service that the incredible Christine Hardick has been working on and that you've managed to roll out has been successful in mitigating some of these sorts of complaints.
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. That's a difficult one to answer. Maybe it's a conversation that we can have offline just to get more specifics in the type of complaints you're receiving. Again, the alternate response program is limited to certain enforcement activity. We don't do it for everything. They're low priority calls, very minor violations, and again, with no previous history on that address. So we'd have to get into discussion about specifics of what the complaints are and what the concerns are.
Okay, that's no problem. We do end up with a lot of these complaints where people where certain neighbors feel targeted by other neighbors for reasons, and end up getting several dozen bylaw complaints for very minor things or things that perhaps would be a waste of time for a bylaw officer. So yeah, I was just wondering whether or not we could be using that process. So yeah, I'll follow up with you offline. Thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor. So colleagues, the staff recommendation before us reads that the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee recommend that Council receive this report for information. Is this report received? Thank you. And thank you to staff, all staff that have come today and all hands that have contributed to the report, and all those who serve in the bylaw and regulatory services. We appreciate your service. Thank you. The final matter of substance before us is 6.2, the new Ottawa Fire Services establishing bylaw. Fairly technical in nature, but there's a brief report, I understand. Brief, you promise? Good. All right. So Chief Hutt is getting settled again at the table. General Manager, is there any introduction?
Thank you, Chair. Just that this is administrative in nature, and normally we wouldn't have a report, but we also are trying to work with council and committee members in providing information in the means of a report to try and not that you need the education, but sometimes it's helpful for the public to understand what we're doing. So this presentation will be very quick.
Fair enough. Chief, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Next slide, please. So and I think GMA has painted the picture. It's really a housekeeping aspect that we're here today, but the establishing bylaw, we'll talk about the administrative updates, the governance of the service, defining the level of service, and then we'll do a quick summary. Next slide, please. The administrative updates, again, just the last time this bylaw was looked at was in 2009, so that was 15 years ago. So it was time that we took a look at it, updated it based on current practices. I just want to be very clear with committee that it does not create any new service levels or budget pressures. It's really just updating over that span of 15 years. Next slide, please. So the governance of the fire service. So it sets policies and frameworks for reporting mechanism for the Ottawa Fire Service. It's council appointment of the fire chief as the head of the fire service. It aligns all our applicable legislation and best practices into one bylaw, one area. It clarifies the delegated authority, for the safeguarding of property and lives. The other thing it does is it just includes the obligations of the fire chief. So it gets into the roles and responsibilities of the fire chiefs. And more importantly, one of the newest updates is it just really clearly and transparently defines the level of services that we offer our residents. Next slide, please. So defining the level of service, we do have direction from the Ontario Fire Marshal Office, and this is one of the areas that they're recommending for all municipalities to clearly define what service levels that we offer our community. We're very fortunate in the service in the city of Ottawa. We're totally encompassing from regular practices to a lot of special operations. And in the bylaw, there's Schedule A, which just defines what the core services are. Next slide, please. So just in summary, the bylaw has been updated to incorporate administrative updates, the governance of the service, and then just defining the level of services within the Ottawa Fire Service. Happy to answer any questions if there are.
There are no public delegations, no written comments on this matter. So in layman's language, municipalities, from what I understand, are not legally required to have a fire service. We elect to have one. And so there is a governance structure, framework that is required. This bylaw spells that out. Is that correct?
You're hired.
Excellent.
That's exactly what it is.
Very good. Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. So that this committee recommends that council approve the proposed Ottawa Fire Service establishing bylaw as described in this report and in the general form set in document 1 and repeal bylaw 2009-319 as amended. Is this matter carried?
Carried.
Thank you. Okay, we've dealt with item 7. Item 8 is in-camera items. Any in-camera? Seeing none. Item 9, we've information previously distributed, the Property Standards License Appeals Committee, appointment from the reserve. So that was a memo that was previously circulated. Any notices of motion? Seeing none. Any inquiries? Seeing none. Any other business? Oh, so the next meeting of this committee will be on June the 17th, which is a Monday, rather than our usual Thursday. So that was amended. And at that meeting, we will receive the 2023 annual reports for both the Ottawa Paramedic Services and Ottawa Fire Services. So that will be a good meeting to receive those 2 reports and get updates. And again, General Manager, thanks again for your service. We provided some opening remarks, but we really have appreciated your professionalism and service at this committee for as you're in this position, and best wishes to you. And we still have a few weeks to work with you before your formal retirement. So thank you again. As there's no other business before this committee, today's meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.